For Artifact 6, I created a series of digital citizenship lessons that were taught to 7th grade students during advisement time. This is a 30-minute time segment set aside at the end of homeroom on Mondays and Fridays. Our school uses this time to teach lessons related to the social, emotional, or behavioral needs of our students. For Standard 3.1, ISTE Criterion 8, I created 2 mini lessons related to social responsibility and empathy. They were number 5 and 6 in the Digital Citizenship series of lessons. This lesson was step 1 in the process of helping middle school students develop empathy by explaining the negative impacts of bias on individuals and society. I began by asking students what comes to mind when they hear the word bias. After a guided discussion, bias was defined. Students were randomly placed in small groups. They drew a scenario card from my basket. The groups were asked to discuss what biases might be present, how might these biases affect the people involved, what are the broader consequences of these biases on society. A designated spokesperson presented their scenario and discussion points to the class. After all groups finished, students were given sticky notes in different colors. They were asked to write down one way they could personally challenge a bias on one color and an example of bias they've observed on another color, then posted them on the board. After this discussions, students completed an exit ticket. They were asked to answer the question, why is it important to be aware of bias? Some of the answers were surprisingly mature. Others revealed that middle school students are already intimately acquainted with bias on a personal level. The lesson objective for mini lesson 6 was for students to define empathy and its importance in social interactions, specifically when using technology. This lesson began with the presentation of this slide and a recent social media post about Taylor Swift. I briefly summarized the situation without revealing the bias element. I asked the class to discuss the situation and how it made Taylor feel. I then asked, why is it important to consider other people's feelings? I discovered that Taylor Swift was a powerful hook for 7th grade students. We watched this video and followed up with a discussion about how social media platforms and news aggregators can use algorithms that filter information based on a user's past behavior or demographics, creating echo chambers where people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs. At the end of the discussion, students were asked to rewrite the social media post about Taylor Swift without biases. Here is an example of one student's work. The next 2 mini lessons show evidence for Standard 3.3 ISTE Criterion 10, which is safe, ethical, and legal practice. Digital Citizenship Lesson 3 was titled Unveiling the Copyright Mystery. I started with a hook question. Can we freely use anything we find online? Thanks to language arts teachers, students revealed a good baseline knowledge that helped this lesson progress easily along. We started with a video that was produced by the U.S. Copyright Office. I first saw it in my iText 7455 class. It was a very clear and concise explanation of fair use. I then asked the class what's the difference between copyright infringement and fair use. We discussed until I felt confident that students understood the concepts. The link to the video was shared on their eClass page for reference as they worked on their assignment, which was to create a public service announcement about responsible online content creation. They had to model the use of copyrighted material in a fair use way. They could produce a video, slide, poster, any visual of choice, or text remix following fair use principles. I encouraged creativity and responsible content creation. Here is a sample Google slide from one of my students. I started this lesson by asking students what ethics means and how it might apply to the online world. I asked one of my high-energy students to record responses on the board. I then divided students into small groups and asked them to choose one of the key principles on this slide and write down actions or behaviors that reflect the principle online. For example, for respect, use kind comments and refrain from cyberbullying. Groups shared their ideas. The class discussed similarities and differences between groups. Then each group was given a worksheet assigned via Google Classroom containing real-world scenarios that raise ethical dilemmas online. They discussed these 4 questions. What is the ethical dilemma in this situation? What are the different options the person in the scenario has? Which option best follows the principles of online ethics we discussed? Why? And what are the potential consequences of each choice? They then typed onto the scenario document. Assessment was accomplished by observing students' participation in discussions. The next 2 mini lessons show evidence for Standard 3.4, ISTE Criterion 11, which is digital identity and data privacy. This was the first of the digital citizenship lessons that I taught, and I think that it was my favorite. I started by asking questions to determine how much students knew about digital identity and privacy. We then watched a video that served as the primary source of instruction. It did a really good job of explaining how to create a strong password. I then showed students the cybersecurity awareness icon on their home page. The first thing that students saw was this test for generated passwords. Students entered their current password and the program gave them an approximate hack time. Students quickly became immersed in the activity. They started a competition to see who could come up with the longest hack time password. They were coming up with over 1 billion years when I called times up. It was wonderful to hear groans and no's all over the classroom. The lesson ended with students completing a Google Forms survey answering yes or no to successfully creating a strong password. The extension presented was to interview their parents about their password practices. Mini Lesson 2 also started with questions to students to determine what they already knew about phishing. Once again, we navigated to the school's cybersecurity awareness site. We then watched 2 videos produced by Gwinnett County Public School District. One video explained malware and the other focused on ransomware. Most students had a basic understanding of different types of malware, but they were all completely unaware of ransomware. One student said that sounded like a plot from a James Bond movie. I then had the school's IT technician visit and provide more detailed descriptions of how to analyze emails, websites, and online messages for suspicious clues. The voluntary extension assignment asked students to research famous online scams and share their findings with the class. I was pleasantly surprised to have several students report back to us the next day. They were engaged in the lesson and found the content to be interesting and relatable.